Good morning, Ohio State fans, and welcome back to the 11 Dubcast for Monday, August 25th, the first weekday of the first Ohio State game week of the 2025-26 season. As Urban Meyer used to say, the chase is on, but as I like to say, the chase is on the Dubcast, because I am joined by our producer, Chase Brown, to kick off this game week against Texas. Chase, how you doing? How was your weekend?
I'm doing well. I appreciated that joke. That was a good one. I didn't know where that was heading exactly, but I appreciate where it landed. Yeah, excited to join you today, George.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the vote of confidence. Yeah, it's exciting. You know, we've been spinning our gears all off season, but it's finally here. I wasn't necessarily jonesing for week 0 this past weekend. Honestly, I kind of slept through most of it because
Hmm.
I woke up at 3 a.m. to watch the UFC in Shanghai. So I went back to bed after like 9 o'clock in the morning. But part of the reason I didn't need to watch most of week 0 was because I was looking very much forward to Ohio State versus Texas. So that's probably going to get me and a lot of other people through the week, and I'm very excited for it. And we did have some exciting developments, at least in a sort of speculative sense, over the weekend, because 11 Warriors released the final edition of the depth chart projections, and the biggest differences relative to where things started at camp were what I wanted to talk to you about today. Because there's two interesting starter projections that kind of defied expectations going into camp at the beginning of the month. So those are based on the depth chart projection that Dan Hope posted. Originally, the expectation, at least at the start of camp, was Austin Siereveld was going to start out at right tackle. Incoming transfer Ethan Onianwa was going to start at left. But Phillip Daniels had a late emergence at camp over the last 2 weeks, and now the projection from the Ohio State beat is that Phillip Daniels is actually going to take that right tackle spot. Siereveld has settled into the left tackle spot pretty comfortably over the last few weeks, but Daniels and Onianwa is two guys that came in from the portal. It turns out that Daniels actually seems to be the guy that has the lead on the job now, as opposed to Onianwa. On the other side of the ball, Bo Atkinson from North Carolina was one of the most highly heralded, I guess you could say, incoming players from the portal this past offseason. But it appears that the guy with a little bit more tenure at Ohio State, Caden Curry, is now making the push for one of the two defensive end spots opposite Kenyatta Jackson. Now, both of those groups are ones that can experience rotation. I would say defense probably a little bit more than offense. So it's likely that we still see Onianwa and Atkinson put into the mix in the early stages of the season and as it progresses. But I'm curious, Chase, of the two that kind of defied the preseason expectations of how the starters were going to shake out, which one of those situations surprises you more?
It's probably that Phillip Daniels is going to start at right tackle and Austin Siereveld is going to start at left tackle. Ohio State brought in Ethan Onianwa as someone who was billed, at least by ESPN's Tom Luganville, as a tackle who could have been drafted in 2025 and might have made a push to start, depending on the team that picked him. But instead, he decides to transfer to Ohio State. And you would figure that a guy with that kind of reputation coming in would be a shoo-in to start at left tackle, considering that Josh Simmons and Donovan Jackson were off to the NFL and they needed somebody to come in with experience to fill that spot to protect a new quarterback, whether that was going to be Julian Sand or Lincoln Keenholz at the time. They didn't know, but they were pretty sure that Anianwa could be the guy that would block for both of them or one of them. And to see the offseason that Austin Siereveld has had has really put it into perspective when you consider that he is going to start at left tackle for Ohio State this season. And it's all credit to him. You know, you go back to last winter, he was an Iron Buckeye along with Jeremiah Smith and Sonny Styles, just one of three in the program. He was another Iron Buckeye in the summertime, one of maybe 8 or 9, I believe, who are Iron Buckeyes over the summer. And he's a team captain now. And he's a guy that has shown up on and off the field, both as a leader and both as a performer. And I think that Ohio State's really excited to see what he can do at that left tackle position. When it comes to Phillip Daniels, I also think, too, that he's a transfer from Minnesota. He didn't come in with maybe the billing that Anianwa did, but he was somebody that was hungry to prove that he belonged here. Cincinnati guy, homegrown guy, Buckeye State guy, who's ready to make a mark on a Big Ten stage, as he did the past couple of years at Minnesota. Where he's ready for this opportunity, and he's been working with a bunch of different coaches all offseason to make sure that he takes hold of the role. I do think, George, what you brought up was important, though. This is not saying that, Bo Atkinson or Anianwa are not going to be involved at all this season. Those guys are probably going to be heavily involved. It just means that they might not be the first players on the field week one against Texas. They'll probably be guys that rotate in pretty frequently.
I think hungry is an interesting word to describe Phillip Daniels, because I remember when we received the initial news that he was going to come over from Minnesota and we saw pictures of him on the field, a lot of reaction from people we work with was, wow, this guy is pretty skinny for an offensive lineman, or at least
Yes.
a guy playing on the exterior of the offensive line in the tackle spot. But I was optimistic that, with the success that the strength and conditioning program has at Ohio State, that guys like Mickey Marotti were going to be able to have a positive impact on him adding weight onto his frame. And I would assume that whatever work he has done in the offseason to prepare for himself for this opportunity has now manifested to the point that it looks like he's going to win the starting job. And obviously the stuff that he said in the press about, kind of having a killer instinct and everything is all stuff that you like to hear too. So relative to, three of the guys in this equation that we just talked about, three of the four came in through the portal. I guess five, if you want to call it, Siereveld and Caden Curry and Daniels and Onianwa and Atkinson. It's a little bit different with the offensive line because you had two jobs available and two guys coming in from the portal. You figured that they had the expectation they were going to compete. With the defense, the defensive ends, it's a little bit different because Atkinson was the only guy coming in from the portal. Looking at, Kenyatta Jackson is probably going to get one of the jobs. The backup behind Jackson is CJ Hicks, who was a converted middle linebacker. And then you had Logan George also coming in from the portal, but he's predicted at this point to be more of like a sixth guy in the rotation, if that. So it's really going to be between Caden Curry and Atkinson. You would think that somebody who is transferring in is doing so under the, obviously they're going to have to earn it, but they're coming in under the assumption that they are going to earn the starting job. Not necessarily that it's reserved from them. We don't know if any promises get made behind closed doors. No room for speculation there. That being said, just in kind of a general sense, do you think that it is a bad reflection for a program when players that transfer in from other Power 5 programs come to a school like Ohio State kind of with the expectation that they're going to be able to get a better opportunity in a starting job and then don't end up getting it in favor of players that have more of a tenure and experience with the program like Caden Curry?
Not necessarily. I think of two things. When it comes to edge rusher or defensive end, I imagine it very similarly to when an offense runs 12 personnel on their first snap, and they're going to have two tight ends out there sacrificing one of their receivers to put on the field. Technically, that second tight end gets the start, but that third wide receiver doesn't. So we're saying, let's say Brandon Inniss gets taken off the field in favor of Will Kazmarek on the first snap against Texas. Technically speaking, Will Kazmarek is going to get a start and Brandon Inniss won't. Now, Ohio State in their scorebook, they might reflect that Brandon Inniss got the start, and that's all good and well. Whether or not Bo Atkinson is the first player on the field when they face Texas maybe isn't an accurate reflection of whether or not he won't be the starter this season. It could very well be true that Caden Curry starts the game and then Bo Atkinson ends up playing more snaps. I would also say this, with Bo Atkinson playing at a school like North Carolina, a well-respected school and a well-respected program, but not the one of the stature of Ohio State, who's to say that in this time that Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry have been backing up Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau out throughout their careers, that if they were to have played at North Carolina, that they also wouldn't have produced the same level as Bo Atkinson did. So we really don't know, and we're not the ones that are watching practice to determine whether or not Kenyatta and Caden are ready for the opportunity that they may be given against Texas. But we can trust that these coaches have had far more time to evaluate the players that Kenyatta and Caden can be as opposed to Bo Atkinson. So I do think that there is still an excitement for what Bo Atkinson can accomplish on the field. I do think that if it does end up being Kenyatta and Caden on the field first against Texas, that it could just be not only their performance on the field that's earned them that spot, but also their leadership. And that was something that Dan noted in his depth chart projection, was that those two guys have come up most frequently, whether it's been Larry Johnson or whether it's been Ryan Day or their teammates. They have said that Kenyatta and Caden have stepped up as leaders in the room this season, this offseason rather, going into the year, that they had been the guys that have taken hold of the leadership role that Sawyer and Tuimoloau left behind last season. So it could just be that them starting in those spots are a reflection of that too.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how eager Ohio State is to rotate in the first game of the season, given the pedigree of the opponent. I would imagine they're going to be more willing to experiment a little bit in the follow-up games against teams like Grambling State and Ohio, where they can kind of afford to be a little bit more experimental. But you would think that they want to lead with their best feet forward against Texas. That being said, if things are going awry or not according to plan, it'll be interesting to see how much of a leash that they give to those guys that are presumably going to end up being the starters and how much rotation they decide to do as the game progresses. But we've got a handful more of days to speculate on that before we see the results actually come in. We will be counting down the days to Saturday eagerly all week. It feels like the offseason went by very quickly. I hardly got to brag about Ohio State's national championship win to all of the Clemsonites in South Carolina for as long as I would have wanted to, but we're on to a new season. It's time for the title defense campaign, and I'm looking forward to watching it along with you, Chase, and everybody at 11 Warriors. So thank you very much for tuning in. We're going to be back tomorrow with Kyle Jones to talk about last week's film analysis, film study for Caleb Downs, and maybe preview a little bit of the Texas game and some other interesting observations Mr. Jones has regarding this upcoming Buckeye season. So tune in for that. Until then, thank you very much, and we'll see you then. Take care, folks.